morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Sorry I'm late. Meeting's still going on. Energy is simply central to human lives. The human condition was a life expectancy at birth of around 30 years throughout all of human history, till about 200 years ago, and for most places in the world, only the next generation or two, the arrival of modern energy, first in the form of peat and coal, then oil, then natural gas, and a few years later, the derivative energy sources made possible by hydrocarbons, for example, large-scale hydro, nuclear power, wind, solar, batteries, geothermal, whatever it is, that are enabled by the presence of hydrocarbons. This growth in the global energy system has just transformed the human condition. That is the strong position of the United States, that progress in the world on almost all of the world's problems is made by energy addition. How do we address poverty? Clean cooking, for example. Millions of deaths a year because people don't have access to modern fuels. Propane instead of wood or dung. It's more energy. How do we increase energy affordability in countries? More energy. How do we increase national security and threats from outside? More energy. Key also for energy policies, and this is what the United States under President Trump is doing, is just returning to common sense. Energy is about people making their lives better, and math. How do you make their lives better? What investments make sense and what investments don't make sense? We have a lot of data, unfortunately, over the last 20 years of what investments don't make sense. Here in the European nations, where the IEA is based, they've gone off track in energy policy. The U.S. and the Trump administration have been very candid about that. That's the choice of every individual nation. But the economy of Europe was 25% of global consumption 15 years ago, as was the United States. Little larger population here, little lower on average net income, but 25% of global consumption for both regions. The United States today is 28% of global consumption, and the European nations, EU including UK, the same chunk of nations from 2010, today is 17% of global consumption. Just a dramatic energy divergence. This was a choice. It was a political choice to make energy expensive here. The result of that has been the exporting of energy-intensive manufacturing out of Europe, and a reduction in what living standards otherwise would be, and a reduction in the military power of the nations of Europe. As our longtime allies and partners, we regret this decision. We hope those decisions are reversed, and we're certainly seeing a lot of nations, at least privately, talking about wanting to become competitive again, wanting to reindustrialize their countries, wanting to have strong militaries. That's the goal of the United States. Regarding the International Energy Agency, it's been a key data collection agency for 52 years to record trends, not just in energy production, consumption, but storage and available resources, and how, as changes in the world arrive, as disruptions arrive, how do we maintain energy security across the world? This is a critical mission, and I would say for decades, the IEA has done it in admirable fashion. It has been a superlative data organization. Maybe 10 years ago, it adopted a climate agenda. Very unusual for an agency focused on energy security to go all in on a platform that is essentially energy subtraction. It's a platform that's made energy more expensive and shrunk the growth of energy. In fact, in Europe as a whole, they consume and produce less energy today than they did 10 years ago. Very few nations in the world have that pattern. Economic growth is tied to growth in energy consumption. United States' concern with the International Energy Agency is that they've adopted an anti-energy, expensive, less energy platform, and that they fully endorse Paris Net Zero 2050. A truly unusual declaration that so many nations made. 0.0% chance of it being achieved. That's not a worry. That's not going to happen. The worry is the strong efforts to get there, to try to approach that, meaning the only way you can do that is restrict the production of hydrocarbons that are 83% of global energy, about the same as they were 50 years ago when the IEA was formed. But if you stand in the way of the world's main energy engine, you just drive up the price of it, and you shrink your energy production. We want the IEA to return to its original mission that it executed very well, of carefully recording energy data across the planet and coordinating among the major energy consumers about trends in energy, about storage flows, and about how to handle disruptions. That is the essential mission of the IEA. It has the resources, the people, and the technology to execute on that mission. Our goal is focus on energy addition, focus on enhancing human lives. Whatever nation wants to say they're going to achieve net zero 2050, a combination of dishonesty and an impoverishment program, but fine if countries want to do that, but we don't want the International Reporting Agency for Energy and Coordination Agency for Energy to adopt an anti-energy agency. We delivered that message very clearly over the last few days. I would say there's a fair amount of support. Most of it's quiet behind the scenes. We agree, absolutely, that's what we should do. But there's been such a group mentality, 10 years invested in an illusion, but a destructive illusion of net zero 2050, that the U.S. will use all the pressure we have to get the IEA to eventually, in the next year or so, move away from this agenda. Nations are free to engage in any agenda they want, but the energy agency founded for energy security needs to focus on energy security and not energy impoverishment. If we can achieve that goal, and I think we have a reasonable chance of achieving that goal, it'll be a very proud achievement. We will remain a proud and original founding member of the IEA. But if the IEA is not able to bring itself back to focusing on the mission of energy honesty, energy access, and energy security, then sadly we would become an ex-member of the IEA. But that's still a work in progress. Very productive dialogues over the last day and a half. A lot of more in private than in public. But I'm encouraged that I think we can return a focus on energy and a focus on bettering human lives. I'll take any questions you might have.
Please state your name and outlet.
Stefano Porcello for Europe. What's your interpretation of Mr. Birol's speech yesterday? And also, don't you feel that you're being isolated by EU officials?
Yeah, certainly a number of the European nations have staked their political platforms and, frankly, their desire to be relevant in some area in the world on a net zero agenda. It is clung too tightly. Only the cold, hard realities and ultimately uprising of people and voting out political parties and changing things. Very few people are going to recant. You know, they're going to become quieter about this agenda, and a lot of them are just going to be voted out of office. So change takes time, but I think the waves of change and the reemergence of honest discussion about climate change and energy, that has begun.
Forrest from Reuters. Could you comment on why General Francis Donovan made a surprise visit to Venezuela? Will this prepare the grounds for Trump to visit? And are there still security concerns in the country and for the oil fields?
I would say in the last 6 weeks, I got to do the math in my head, we've seen just tremendous progress in Venezuela. The security situation on the ground, the release of political prisoners, the start of the opening up of the press, huge progress there. This is President Trump's sort of groundbreaking, out-of-the-box diplomacy. How can we drive massive positive change in a nation without American troops on the ground, without American tax dollars being expended? Thrilled about that. I won't comment about any things that may happen in the future, but our goal for sure is to see massive progress in Venezuela to the benefit of the Venezuelan people, to the benefit of the American people, and to the benefit of the Western Hemisphere.
Hi, Jennifer Scher for the Epoch Times. Last month, EU Energy Commissioner Don Jorgensen warned about Europe becoming increasingly reliant on liquefied natural gas. Do you share that assessment? And I have a follow-up question on that. Following the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines years ago, do you think it was a good thing for Europe to be less reliant on Russian gas in the long term? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And the United States, President Trump, in his first term in office, we've been very outspoken about being dependent on Russian gas. Europe was major pioneers in oil and gas production, significant oil and natural gas production in the European nations. They've decided to squeeze those industries, dramatically reduce their own production of hydrocarbons that are not only the main drivers of the economies around the world, they are the dominant providers of energy in Europe today. The United Kingdom, maybe the most all-in on net zero, gets 75% of its total primary energy from oil and natural gas. So just saying you don't like them, you're strangling the production of them in your countries, does not mean you don't need them. So to reduce your own consumption of them and then tie the largest supplier of natural gas, oil, and coal to Europe was Russia. Very, very reckless, very ill-conceived, and obviously has had dramatically negative implications from it. Is the United States a reliable supplier of natural gas and energy? Absolutely. We've never used energy as a political weapon, never. And exports from the United States is businesses. All sorts of natural gas suppliers, all sorts of oil suppliers, coal suppliers, nuclear technology suppliers. These are businesses that sign agreements. Americans' economic growth, American business, American innovation is because we drive hard to improve our processes, and we live by our contracts and the word we do. So I think Commissioner Jorgensen's comments very, very unfortunate. The United States is a rock-solid supplier of energy. You can't have a better partner with energy than the United States.
Good morning, Joseph Atterman with CNN. You've spoken a lot about the need for more energy, more hydrocarbons. What kind of leverage do you foresee the US using to convince European allies to stick with hydrocarbons, or is it just a question of waiting for the political situation to change?
Yeah, it isn't a matter, like I'm often saying that our government's policies are trying to protect hydrocarbons. Of course, complete nonsense. They don't need protecting. I spent a lot of my career, I went to college to work on fusion energy. I worked on solar energy in graduate school, geothermal after then fission energy. So we are believers, the United States as well, whatever energy source works, that the math works, which is different in different countries, different applications, different whatever. So it isn't that we're trying to promote hydrocarbons, we're trying to promote realism and humanism. If you care about your people, you care about your economy, you care about progress in the world, you've got to follow the math around energy. So as Europe has shown, trillions of dollars of subsidized and government-directed investment has not changed in large scale the energy system. It's just made hydrocarbons more expensive, which has made them uncompetitive in energy-intensive manufacturing, which just makes it leave Europe. So their total energy pie becomes smaller. So the U.S. has no, we're not here to twist arms or whatever. We're here to say, look, you were powerful, wealthy, industrial nations and fantastic allies of the United States. They remain great allies of the United States. But do you really want to cease all economic growth? Do you really want to reduce your geopolitical power and your geopolitical influence and weaken your militaries and weaken your national security? We hope you don't. We're here to help. We want to encourage. But the policies get decided here. I will say there are a number of European nations, major European nations, that are quietly pivoting on energy policy. They want to be industrial competitive again. And you're going to see, I think, some very positive transformations in the energy trajectory in Europe. But 15 years with the gas pedal on going the opposite direction, that will take time to reverse. But that ultimately is up to the citizens of the European nations.
Jan Abzat, Polish Press Agency. Mr. Secretary, I have a question about your renewed threat to withdraw from the IEA. You said it once again today, and aren't you afraid that potential U.S. withdrawal from the agency would create a void that Beijing is really waiting to step into?
Yeah, of course, there's always a risk of that. There's always a risk of that, which is why Our goal is not to withdraw. We desperately do not want to withdraw. But an agency founded 52 years ago based on a tripling of oil prices and a crisis in energy supply. It was formed for energy security. It was formed to bring the nations of the world together to share resources, to share data, and cooperate on better energizing their countries, and to be able to skate through shocks in the energy system. That's why the IEA was formed. That's a critical mission it plays. You can't at one time be that energy security, human advancement agenda, and then have a parallel mission that's to advocate for reducing access to energy, driving up the price of energy, and saying to the 7 billion people that don't get to live lives like all of us in this room that no, we can't really afford for you to rise up. That's not only energy naive, I think it's ultimately immoral agenda. You know, in public, everyone says, no, we're driving towards these new energy sources because they're cheaper and they're more affordable and they're cleaner and they're better. Well, if they're all of those things, believe me, you won't have to preach and impose them on the planet. They'll fly like an eagle. So what we want to do is return honesty to the agency. But if it's an agency that has a meaningful part of its being that's to restrict the growth of energy sources and restrict the rise of developing nations around the world, we can't in good conscience continue to be a member of that agency. That agency, I should say, before last year, for 5 years, issued World Energy Outlook reports, none of which was based in a shred of reality. All of the scenarios they published in their World Energy Outlooks were based on European climate policies being adopted by the world. That's simply not going to happen. Europe may want to become poorer and deindustrialize, but I can tell you the other 170 nations around the world don't have great interest in that agenda. A few of them do, but not many. Not many. We just want to bring it back to reality. We don't want to leave.